Good evening. On behalf of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences and the John Adams Institute, I wish you a warm welcome. It's Freedom Month at the Royal Academy, Maand van de Vrijheid, 80 years after we were liberated by the Allied forces. We celebrated Liberation Day. We hosted the 80th birthday of NIOD, the Institute for War, Holocaust and Genocide Studies, which is part of the Royal Academy. We studied Spinoza and Thorbecke. We discussed academic freedom. There were guided tours of the Trippenhuis, and there's still one in 2 days, so if you're interested. And there were interviews with members of the Royal Academy online. Tonight we will return to a country that gave us back our freedom 80 years ago, the United States of America. And we will do so with the help of wartime President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who proposed 4 fundamental freedoms that people everywhere in the world should be able to enjoy. And tonight we will explore the historical roots of these 4 freedoms. We will discuss what has happened since and what is happening at this very moment. Tracy Metz, director of the John Adams Institute, will be leading tonight's discussion. So please give Tracy a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Joost. It's always a pleasure getting applause when you haven't even done anything yet. I take it as a vote of confidence. So, of course, welcome also on behalf of the John Adams Institute, and a great word of thanks to the KNAW for approaching us to be part of this important celebration in the month of freedom. I think you knew this, Joost. I had told you that we had been talking to the KNAW for years before COVID about doing events here together. I think we were just about to actually do it, then COVID hit, and then everything fell apart. So it feels like a moment of historic justice to actually be here, have all of you in this beautiful room, and to be working on this event in collaboration with our partner for today. I think it's appropriate to mention that today is Memorial Day. Did you know that? Ah, good. The day on which the U.S. commemorates all the military people who have served and who have died in the service of their country. We're calling this event today Land of the Free with a question mark, as we all see that many of the freedoms we have taken for granted during our lives are now under pressure. Freedom is not apolitical. Freedom is not ahistorical. And in a very short time, we have discovered that we cannot take it for granted. Of course, we knew that, but now it really means something. The title is, of course, taken from, as Joost mentions, FDR's State of the Union address in 1941, when America was not yet involved in World War II. In that State of the Union, he enumerated these 4 freedoms: freedom from want, of religion, of free speech, and from fear. It was his speech and these freedoms that inspired the post-war order, laying the foundations for the Atlantic Charter and the United Nations. So that brought us to invite 4 speakers in sets of 2, who will each address one of the 4 freedoms. First will be James Kennedy, professor of modern Dutch history, even though he's American. How did you do that? It's like me ending up at NRC, UT being a professor of modern Dutch history. Modern Dutch history at the University of Utrecht about freedom from want. And he is the co-author of his most recent book, together with his co-author, is Gescheiden Partners, een geschiedenis van overheid en religieuze organisaties in Nederland. So very relevant for this evening. He will be followed by Philip Gorski, professor of sociology at Yale, on the freedom of religion. Phil is currently a fellow at the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Studies, just down the road. You didn't have to come from far, did you? And he is also the author of a book with a wonderful title, The Flag and the Cross: White Christian Nationalism and the Threat to American Democracy. I'm sure you immediately understand why we had to ask Phil to speak this evening. Then there will be a Q&A with you and with our two speakers, for which we have prepared some propositions for you to consider. Our third speaker is Kim Whaley, legal scholar, author, and this year a Fulbright scholar, a visiting professor at the University of Leiden, and our first John Adams thinker in residence. Her recent book, Pardon Power, also super topical and with a fantastic title, just received the Silver Award of the IBPA, the Independent Book Publishers Association. Congratulations. Our fourth and final speaker is Clarice Gargaard. What did we agree that I would say, Clarice? I'm going to say the whole thing. Dutch-American Liberian, journalist, documentary filmmaker, and founder of the feminist platform Lilith. She's known for her advocacy of digital freedom and social justice. She served as the Netherlands UN Women's Representative in 2019. Just last week, her new book came out called From Resistance to Revolution, 10 Roads Towards a New World. And then again, we have time for a Q&A with you. We have some propositions for you to consider and to react to. I'll ask you to stand up or sit down, depending on whether you agree or not. And we will close with some final remarks, and then we'll have drinks together and discuss what we've just heard. I'm really looking forward to this evening. I'm so glad that you're all here. Thank you for joining us. And now I would like to hand it over to our first speaker, James Kennedy.
Thank you for your being here this evening, and I look forward to a conversation with you about the freedom which I've been asked to talk about, and that is the freedom from want. As Tracy already indicated, this comes from a speech, State of the Union address, that Franklin Roosevelt gave on January 6, 1941. And he talks very specifically about a freedom from want. And he explains which, translated into world terms, means economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. Now, there are a couple things we can say about this rather full sentence about freedom from want. First of all, its meaning. Word want, the word want Franklin Roosevelt uses, he uses in a way that American usage no longer really does use, and that is not want as desire, but want as a lack of nothing. You can sort of think about it in the cadence of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And another translation of that is, I lack nothing. So what we're talking here about want is as lacking nothing. So the freedom is of lacking nothing. It suggests a life of abundance. It suggests a life of plenty. And maybe that's when we can go to the first slide here, which I can do myself. Okay, so... Oops, I'm going back. I am going back, so it must be possible to go forward. There we go. So this is a painting by Norman Rockwell. It is meant to depict freedom from want. This is on the Saturday Evening Post, on the front of the Saturday Evening Post from about early 1943. It indicates this enormous turkey here, and you see people here also at the dinner table. The life of plenty, a life of abundance, seen certainly in the turkey. The second thing you can say about this is that this is really a global vision. Roosevelt talks about all nations, all peoples. U.S. as the standard and facilitator of a kind of new economic moral order. The U.S. is to take a lead in creating a kind of economic order that will ensure a lack of anything across the globe. Right? So this freedom from want is a world vision that Roosevelt envisages. It's not just one for the United States, but it's for the whole world. And in fact, you can say the UN Charter of 1945 includes it, in which it talks about promoting social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom, often read as taking over from Roosevelt's vision for freedom from want. And the last thing I want to point out about this freedom from want in terms of giving it a kind of a definition is that there's an implication of a higher life than just economic prosperity. Roosevelt talks about healthy peacetime life. So he talks about a kind of way of living, of abundance in a community, in a healthy society, a moral and social order that makes this kind of meeting up together. It's not just about the turkey, it's about the table and it's about the people. It's about, in that sense, enjoying this abundance together in community. It's about, as analysts have indicated, not just about not going hungry anymore, but it's about security and contentment of having a happy place at an abundant table. That is what freedom from want means, I think, for Roosevelt and the people who tried to envisage and to realize his vision. So the question is, 84 years later, where are we? So in crucial ways, you can say humans on this planet are freer from want than they have ever been before. You can talk about that certainly in the case of the United States. As late as 1939, at the end of the Depression, about 60% of rural households and 82% of farm families were classified as impoverished. That's the world that Roosevelt was talking about. We're coming just at the end of the Great Depression, where there was much poverty in the United States. That is now much reduced. You can say that 1940s, maybe a quarter of the population of the United States is classified as living in poverty, and that is now at about 11 or 12%. Still very high, but much less, half of what it once was. And you can certainly say worldwide that similar trends have also been evident. You can think about it also about the number of people living in extreme poverty. In Roosevelt's day was over half the total world's population living in extreme poverty. That is to say, also not even certain of having a roof over their heads. That number is now down to 8 to 10%. You can think also about other kinds of indicators, such as child mortality, those who make it to 15 years, those who don't. In 1950, a quarter of all children born did not make it to the age of 15. Now it is at 4%, one of the greatest changes, really seismological almost, of the last 60 or 70 years. And you can also talk about global well-being. The OECD has made measures of that, indicating that things have gone much better in the world than before. Also, when you take into factors like political governance, when you take a look at also the environmental conditions in which people live, in all continents, you can talk about well-being, have gone up since the days of Franklin Roosevelt. World trade, globalization, technological innovation, better governance, more freedom from want for many, many people. At the same time, you can talk about freedom from want as a problem, that it's not something we've solved, and particularly the inequality of outcomes that is still very much indicative of our world. 1/3 of the world's population faces food insecurity, and 9% of all people living on the planet go to bed hungry every night. In the United States, 1 out of 7 Americans, about 14%, face food insecurity. And according to one survey, it's more tenuous than that. They estimate that 59% of Americans are one paycheck away from being homeless. So you're talking really about a very small margin of prosperity in the United States, according at least to this survey, and also others. Also, the idea of also having a full participation in American life, a life of abundance, is also going down. And that's evident, for example, in the way that Americans think about housing. 53% of non-home owners say, "I will never own a home in my life." And that is a number that is significantly down from before. You could argue that this is a kind of a slipping away of an American dream with its promise of plenty and abundance. Is that what it's about? Freedom from want, the same thing as the achievement of the American dream? It's an interesting question, but you can say that, and then I'll go and... It's a link that was made by this writer, Carlos Bulosan. He writes an essay, is asked to write an essay in the Saturday Evening Post in early 1943 about the freedom from want. Bulosan is from the Philippines. He migrates to the United States at the age of 18 in the early 1930s. Not a good time to come to the United States, and where he ekes out a very meager existence facing widespread discrimination, often brutal discrimination against Filipinos on the west coast of the United States in the 1930s. He managed to stay in the United States. He managed to evade the Filipino Repatriation Act of 1935, which is an effort back in those days, 90 years ago, to really put the pressure on Filipinos to leave the United States and go back home. These rather unpleasant experiences sharpens Bulosan's vision for the United States, and it makes him quite critical of U.S. promises, also makes him a labor organizer, and he sees that it's actually the only way to have a part of this abundance in the United States is to fight for it. It's not something that will be given to you. It's something that must be asserted. It's something that must be fought for. It must be something that must be persisted. And he talks always of we are on the march. The people who are destitute, the people on the outs of society, the marginalized, the discriminated against, we are on the march to claim our own role in the American dream and also to achieve freedom from want. Now, Bulosan is also interested in material conditions, but he sees freedom from want also in a wider way. He talks about the dignity of the individual to live in a society of free men, a recognition of their needed contribution. You are valuable, you are needed. He thinks that's very important for people to achieve. An equal opportunity to serve themselves and each other. Think about that table again, in which people are there to serve others, but also to receive it from others. A full seat at the table of abundance. This is what he envisages for his America. It's only at that moment when everybody has their seat at the table that want is annihilated, to put it in this term, and when America really becomes America. And in some ways, Bulosan's vision in 1943 ties into earlier discussions of the American dream. The man who really coined the phrase and really got the discussion going on the American dream was James Truslow Adams. In 1931, he writes a book in which he talks about the American dream as being something also higher than simply material abundance. He says it's not a dream of motor cars and high wages merely, but a dream of social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable and, I note here, be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. So you see here also a kind of a theme of recognition, of having a recognized, valued place at the table as essential to the American dream, and I think also by extension, freedom from want. The question now, of course, as we conclude, are we closer to achieving that freedom from want, specifically in the United States, than we were before? Bulosan believed throughout his short life, he died of tuberculosis aged age 42, that the American dream was achievable. He believed, continued to believe in American ideals. One of the questions is to what extent Americans still do. We can think about the economic precarious situation of many Americans and the hopelessness that comes from that. Also the rise in anger and polarization at much higher rates in the United States than here, about the heightened levels of depression in the United States, in which 29% of young adults have reported depression at one point in their lives, 10 percentage points higher than it was 10 years ago, and increasing forms of social isolation. Many Americans are also asking, what is my place? Where am I being recognized? Where am I sitting at the table? And how do people look at me? This really leads to a kind of a crisis in what also Charles Taylor has indicated, has described as the politics of recognition, written in the early 1990s, when it was really about the rise of identity politics. These days, you can say, discussion in the United States is really shaped by a kind of populism that also is unsure whether the American system as it now stands, the American liberal democracy as it now stands, can give them the recognition at the table that they think that they deserve. There's a profound skepticism that they have about this, whether the liberal democratic order can give them the kind of contentment and security that seems to be promised in freedom from want. So this is, I think, where we stand now. Are we then further away than in 1941 from achieving freedom from want in the United States? Or is it something that we really will have to see in the current and following years about what is going to happen? What would Carlos Bulosan think about the current state in the United States? And would his belief in American ideals still stand? Thank you for listening.
Before you sit down, James, when we have our Q&A, I will come back to you and see if I can get you to answer that question. Are we further away?
Okay.
So you can think about that.
I will think about it.
Phil, the floor is yours.
Well, I'd like to offer some reflections about the relationship between religion, freedom, equality, and democracy, both in the past and in the present. I'm going to show you two images which I think will provide a good starting point for thinking about that question. This is the first one. Some of you may well recognize this. This is the interior of Onze Lieve Heer op Zolder, which is not too far from here. This is the Roman Catholic hidden church constructed during the mid-17th century. I think it illustrates very nicely, the history of the church illustrates very nicely one way in which religion, freedom, equality, and democracy have been related. Well, it was constructed, of course, not long after the conclusion of the 80 Years' War, which was a war not only about religious freedom, but also for Republican government. And so, we see here already one such connection. But it was also not a public church, as the Reformed churches of the era were known, but a hidden church. It was invisible because only the Reformed Church was allowed to be visible in public. So we already see here a way in which the initial promise of religious freedom gave rise to a certain kind of religious inequality. To not be visible is not to be fully equal. If you visited the church, you'll know that, like many of the hidden churches that were constructed during this period, it's completely invisible as a church from the street. You had to enter it from the alleyway, and the priest who served the church was not allowed to wear his vestments in public. He had to remain, as a priest, wholly and completely out of public view. And this would continue to be the legal situation in the Dutch Republic until the Revolution of 1795, which first gave at least formally legal equal rights to members of all faiths within the Netherlands. And yet it would still be close to another century before that right would really be realized, before the Roman Catholic faith and other dissenting faiths other than the Reformed Church, could actually be visible in public. It's not until 1887 that the St. Nicholas Kirk and it's one of the first larger Roman Catholic cathedrals is constructed as we now know it today in Amsterdam. And it's in that period when many of these hidden churches are actually torn down and replaced, with a few exceptions, including this one, which has now been turned into, of course, a museum, which I think is also significant in the sense that we may be apt to forget this historic connection between religious freedom and democratic freedoms. Now, this isn't just a Dutch story. One can, in fact, tell a very similar story about the United States, and in particular, that region of the United States where I've spent much of my life now, namely New England. New England, as you may know, was originally settled by various groups of English dissenters known as Puritans, many of whom spent some time in Leiden, Rotterdam, also in London before journeying on to what would eventually become New England. Upon arriving and gaining their religious freedom, they promptly denied it to other groups. The state of Connecticut, where I live in the United States, was for a very long time had an established church, the Congregationalist Church. And it was not really until the American Revolution that changed. In the meantime, those initial churches had spawned additional churches, though the way in which the United States or New England solved the problem of religious freedom was not through invisibility, but through mobility. So the city of New Haven, where I live, there's a North Haven, there's a West Haven, there's an East Haven, and the history of all of these other havens, as indeed of New Haven itself, arose out of schism and dissent within the Protestant churches of New England. Well, with the American Revolution, another solution to the problem of religious diversity in the United States is found, and that is separation of church and state. Indeed, the first article of the American Bill of Rights, the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, on the one hand, prohibits a religious establishment, but on the other hand, guarantees the free exercise of religion. And importantly, in the next sentence, guarantees the right of free speech, of free assembly, and of a free press. All rights which people by then had come to realize were essential parts of freedom of religion. After all, there is more to freedom of religion than mere freedom of conscience. Freedom of religion requires, at a minimum, freedom of worship, which requires freedom of assembly and freedom of speech, to which one might add the freedom to advertise one's religious views in public. And yet, even with the passage of the American Constitution, religious establishments remained in the United States. In fact, it was not until 1831 that the state of Connecticut finally disestablished the Congregationalist Church. And even then, an informal Protestant establishment continued to exert enormous cultural influence in the public life of the United States until after World War II. Indeed, it was really not until a series of landmark Supreme Court cases in the 1950s and 1960s, pressed by various upstart religious minorities, Jehovah's Witnesses, Jews, Roman Catholics, that something like full civic equality of all the religious faith in the United States was finally achieved. Now, you might think that there's a different story that we could tell about the rise of democracy and freedom, one that connects enlightenment and democracy. And certainly that is a story that one could tell. One might look to France, to the French Revolution and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, whose first article reads roughly as follows: men are born and remain equal and free and equal in rights. Now, at first blush, this sounds more like Rousseau than Locke. But in fact, the French Declaration was directly inspired by the American Bill of Rights, and in some ways modeled after it, in the sense that it invested individuals with rights that were pre-political, as the U.S. Declaration of Independence put it, people have inalienable and God-given rights, which are antecedent to precede the formation of a polity. And so we see the birth of a new kind of democracy, in part driven by religious diversity and the quest for religious freedom, namely liberal democracy, which invested individuals with rights vis-a-vis the state. So to sum up, we see, I think, a sort of virtuous cycle of liberation in which religious freedom gives rise to religious diversity, which gives rise to demands for religious equality, which leads in turn again to more religious diversity, renewing the cycle, and in the process, lifting up other forms of individual rights, so liberal rights of freedom, of expression, assembly, and the press. But there is also a vicious cycle of reaction against this cycle of liberation. I imagine many of you will also recognize where this image comes from. This is, of course, one of the many images from Donald Trump's failed coup attempt on January 6th of 2021. And the reason I picked out this picture in particular, out of the many I might have picked up, is the flag that you see in the middle. Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president, making this connection between political reaction and religious reaction abundantly clear. Now here we're also confronted in a way with a sort of problem of invisibility, but a different kind of invisibility, not the kind of invisibility we saw in the first picture, but sort of the invisibility of a seismic force, of tectonic plates smashing together and erupting in a gigantic volcanic plume of symbols and protests. Not invisible to everybody, but invisible to many secular and progressive Americans who did not see the potential for this upsurge of religious reaction in the United States. Now, as Tracy mentioned, I and other scholars refer to this as white Christian nationalism. It's not the whole of the MAGA movement, but it is an important element of the MAGA movement. And I would argue that it's best understood as a story that many Americans tell themselves, consciously or unconsciously, about the history of the United States. A story that goes something like this. The United States was founded as a Christian nation. The founders were Orthodox Christian, whatever that means. The founding documents were based on Christian principles, maybe even divinely inspired. The United States has been entrusted with a mission of some kind to spread freedom or democracy or capitalism. And in order to carry out that mission, has been uniquely blessed with power and prosperity. But that mission and the blessings and the prosperity are now threatened by the increasing presence of non-whites, non-Christians, non-native born people on American soil. And so what does it mean then to make America great again? It means to make it whiter, more Christian, and more native born again. And here we see the great reversal of the cycle of liberation. Not equal rights, rights for me, but not for thee. Not religious diversity, but religious supremacy, the supremacy of one particular faith and one particular brand of that faith. Not visibility, but erasure, the erasure of the diversity of the American people. The literal erasure of words like justice, black, woman, from all official documents in the United States. So what can we take away from these two stories that I've just told you? They're both true. There has been a virtuous cycle in which religion and the pursuit of freedom of worship have strengthened liberal democracy, but there have also been cycles of reaction in which that forward progress has been halted or even reversed. I think what we have to take away from this is that the relationship of religion, freedom, equality, and democracy is complicated, ambivalent, and not only in the United States, but around the world. And what I think that means is that those of us who are committed to the causes of freedom and democracy must, on the one hand, be wary of its religious enemies, but also on the lookout for its religious friends, because we need allies everywhere that we can find them. Thank you very much.
May I invite you to the stage, Phil?
Yep.
Wow, very powerful stories, both of you. Thank you so much. Just to start with a minor personal anecdote, Phil, you talked about the disestablishment of the Congregationalist Church. I was so happy to hear someone for the first time ever say the word disestablished. As a schoolgirl, I was good at spelling bees. And the hardest word I was ever given, and I got it, I nailed it, was anti-disestablishmentarianism. I still know the word. It made a huge impression, but I have never, ever heard anyone use that word in actual speech. So, thank you. Okay, James, are we further away from freedom from want than in 1941? What do you think? Mm.
Well, you know, it's a... You know, one thing, if you go back in so you could sort of say the material conditions of life are better than in 1941. So yeah. You can just across the board, you can say that. One of the things, though, that strikes me, and that's what makes me skeptical about whether we're further, is the hope in 1941 by various kinds of writers, even ones as critical as Bulasson, that of a social order that would bring in freedom from want. There was a hope for it. There was an expectation that one day it would be achieved. And that means also, in concrete political terms, that there was also a commitment to trying to achieve this. And that's something I think that characterizes American politics in the mid-20th century. I mean, with all kinds of ups and downs, but I would still say that's really more characteristic of American politics from the 30s through the 70s.
Like the American dream itself, always optimistic. Always
optimistic, but also here tied in, I think, with the idea of actually making this a realization for Americans and making through various kinds of programs initiated by the government, but also other kinds of initiatives, also through civil rights.
Hard work.
But always through hard work. I mean, that's always part of the American creed. But I think now, I think that there's declining belief that the American political order or the social order can actually make this possible for many of its citizens. And it's that skepticism, that's that despair, even that I see, that makes me wonder if there is a political will to really achieve freedom from want.
And we see so much coming from the top now, we see so much anger. Huh?
Absolutely, anger, that's right, and distrust, right? So part of this is also a kind of a confidence, a trust that you have a system that will achieve this. And if there is declining trust in government and other institutions in American society, it's clearly the case through this polarization, then I wonder to what extent the conditions for making this happen will occur.
And this is not a sentiment that I traditionally associate with Christianity, with religious belief and faith. That always seems to be more oriented towards trust and the good things in people. Do you sense a sense of disappointment among the religious right, Phil?
Honestly, I mostly at the moment sense a lot of elation about what they have achieved after half a century of systematic organizing and fundraising, though of course what they do also have is a deep sense of grievance at the loss of their once dominant position within American society, which they interpret as persecution.
Well, I mean, you've read, Tim Alberta's book, or where the idea here of that I think Robert Jeffress, famous Baptist minister in Texas, said, we are under siege. So there's this idea of being that we are a community that used to be, the center of American society. We used to have our place at the table, and now this is being taken away from us by these new groups and these new ideologies that are really, in that sense, wrenching America in the wrong direction, as I think they would describe it.
That's why this is such a fundamental time. Huh?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental time.
Shall I go to our first proposition?
We can.
And see what you think? Yes. You can also see it here on the monitor. That's easier. Phil, the monitor is easier. Yeah.
I can see it.
Yeah. Do economic and religious freedoms build bridges, or do they draw new lines? I'm curious what our audience thinks. So if we call the first one A and the second one B, would the people who agree with A stand up? A is the bridge building. Good. I would like to hand the microphone to you to tell us why you vote for building bridges. Can you tell us your name?
Yes, my name is Rick Williamson. I was kind of hesitant, and I think maybe I believe in hope and a positive way of thinking. That's why I first thought, well, can we really, when we have our economic wants or religious freedoms, yes, I do think if we do it in the right way, we can build bridges. And I'm an optimist. So that's why I was kind of hesitant, and I thought, yes, we can do this.
Okay.
So
we
maybe
can do
it's
it.
maybe it's
Yes,
the
we
old
can.
Obama
Where have I
kind
heard
of
that before? Could you hand the microphone to your neighbor? Your name, please?
My name is Meg Brew, and I also have hope that we can turn around some of the confusion that's going on in the U.S. now, and that we can build the bridges. So I'm optimistic as well that there's enough good people that we can build bridges.
Okay. Even though actually you know better, but you still...
know.
Yeah. I could hear that subtext in your voice. So who would vote for B, drawing new lines?
Maybe I would.
Who said that? Hans, can you give this gentleman the microphone?
Yes.
Don't sit down, I'll lose you.
Yeah, hello, I'm Jebel Kessler.
Could you please stand up?
Yes, of course. Well, my consideration would be that the proposition should probably be very specific about what you mean by economic freedom, as it is a process more than an actual state.
And who benefits?
And who benefits and who uses his own freedom in including others. So I'm very sorry, but actually it's not that I vote for B. It's just as an academic I would make it more difficult. I'm sorry.
Yes, please, ma'am. Could you stand up and tell us your name?
Yes,
the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Annelies Abink. Well, it should bring to build bridges. But what is freedom? Is it the freedom to do what's best for me? You said that the Puritans left England to get freedom, and they use it to suppress other people. So my question would be, freedom to do what? And that's why I'm pessimistic.
So you're on the fence, basically?
Yes, but on the downside.
Sorry to hear it. I'll be interested to hear how you feel when you leave after our event this evening.
Yes.
Who benefits? Phil? Please.
Say something. So I think one important point to make here is that liberal freedom is a very particular understanding of freedom, which focuses on individual rights and autonomy, often to the exclusion of individual obligations and social connections. And certainly in the democratic revolutions of the 18th century, those liberal freedoms were always connected to republican freedoms. And by republican freedom, I mean not simply the freedom to, but the obligation to participate in the project of democratic self-government. And when those two things become unhitched from each other, the liberal rights of the individual, the republican responsibilities of citizenship, then liberal rights become mere libertarianism or libertinism. And it is through collective self-government, not just at the level of the national government, not even just at the level of local government, but in our workplaces, in the voluntary organizations that we belong to, that those bridges are built. So liberal freedom without republican obligation is going to burn bridges rather than build bridges.
Would you like to respond, James?
Very briefly, I would, my colleague at Utrecht, Bas van Bavel, has talked about how economic freedom over the long run can actually lead to forms of exclusion from forms of social progress. We can put it in those terms. So you can start off in his story is that there are many, often societies start off with all kinds of communal forms in which there are a sense of collective responsibilities. And then, but these societies tend strongly toward, over time, accumulation of economic power so that the relatively few really call the shots economically. And that means that greater inequalities occur. And that means also forms of divisions also between people also rise. And so that you can talk about the fragmentation of society coming through economic freedom or through a long trajectory of economic freedom. First, it starts off being beneficial to people, but then through the accumulation
and
of
freedom becomes privilege.
And freedom becomes privilege, and the more wealth, the more you can use it. Yes.
Yeah, and the more there is to defend. Phil?
I just add, I think that's absolutely right. I just want to add one other thing, which is that economic inequality is not just a social problem, it is also a political problem.
Yes.
And this is something that all classical theorists of republican self-government realized, that great men who are too great represent a threat to the liberty of everyone, and that their greatness must be tamed and constrained. It is not an accident that the word oligarchy, which would have been unknown in public discourse in the United States even 2 years ago is suddenly on the tips of many people's tongues because it is a description of the political problem, the threat to democracy that comes from the levels of social inequality that we now experience.
Taken from the Russian example.
Exactly.
This ties in very well to our next proposition. Space at the table, or have we pulled up the bridge to the moat? Would you like to respond?
Have today's economic elites made space at the table or pulled up the ladder behind them?
That connects very well to what we were just...
Yeah, well, I think that's what we're going to say, you know, that this is today's economic elites. If you can talk about process of globalization that have taken place very evidently since 1980, that we can talk about, these are often not just then in one particular country, but that they are expanded across the globe, and this is part of a global pattern. That this is something that makes full space at the table less likely, and that they are the ones they're people who then, as we've talked about, defended their own economic interests. What we can say, I mean, is that there is a qualification I would put on this, is that there is, it's not really clear from the economic data of the last 20 years that inequality, economic inequality has continued apace. So that it's in the last 20 years, yes. I mean, there are, you take a look at some OECD data suggests that is maybe not the case, that inequality is slowing.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I am not kidding you. I'm not saying it's true, but I am citing it. There are some indications that we don't necessarily have to believe that inevitably as we go into the future that inequality is always going to rise, even under these rather less than ideal conditions. So.
Well, you have statistics and...
Yeah, sort of, yeah. So they have statistics, yes. Yeah.
Okay, Jan, stand up.
Well, this is a question. Also, right, what are you measuring then, right?
Yes.
So it's...
Could you stand up, tell us your name, and use the microphone?
Jan Kout is the name. No, I was wondering whether you talk about inequality in income or wealth. It's incontestable, I think, that in wealth terms, it has grown enormously.
Yeah, so it's grown enormously. Especially in the first... So first of all, certainly you take a country like the Netherlands, the difference, I mean, when it comes to income, inequality has not substantially increased. In some ways, it's maybe even slightly narrowed. When it comes to who actually has property, who owns stuff, then you can talk about a very great divergence between the richest and the poorest since about 1980. But I'm just talking about when you take a look at all countries across the globe. Also what other countries, so let's just say middle income countries, what's being earned there. If you add these kinds of things up, then it's not clear when you take an aggregate picture that we're talking about ever greater inequality across the board globally. That's I think, the qualification they would make. It's not a deeply impressive correction, but it's not growing.
Would anyone else like to react to this proposition? Marijn, did I see you put up your hand? Could you stand up and tell us your name?
Marijn Boender. I'm deep in thought. I'll try and keep it short. And Tracy knows that's not my strong suit. Actually,
I'll help.
Well, I was first of all interested of the order you decided to treat the four freedoms in, because of course Roosevelt started with freedom of expression, freedom of worship first, and then came to want and fear.
It was really, we just wanted to start off with that obscenely large
it's very intriguing. I'd always interpreted it to be kind of laying the groundwork. To put it in a broader perspective, of course, as Professor Kennedy alluded to, Roosevelt had come off the Great Depression, the New Deal, we all know about it, and from periods of time in which the Americans lived in abject poverty, almost the majority. I think for the first time in American history, maybe in global history, it became clear that freedoms are not and never have been absolute. In a sense that freedoms always have been restricted by where my freedom ends, yours started, or the other way around. And in the land of opportunity, with the American dream, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the underlying premise always had been that somehow these liberties were endless. Like the American plains, you could always move further west, but by the time the crisis of the 1890s and then the 1930s really hit the US economy, the realization had dawned that it was endless. So from that perspective, I think Roosevelt tried to find a framework to rebalance these freedoms to the benefit of all. And he realized that he should do that not only for the United States or even the American continent, but if he didn't do that, he would be on to not only one but two world war. Well, actually, one world war they had seen, the second one had started, but he also saw that there had to be a new world order. Yeah. And if you bring that to today, the oligarchs of today kind of relive the American dream as if there's an endless Wild West where you can just grab, and the entitlement of the elites to the full amount of wealth. And interestingly, that's just not within one country, but also between countries. Looking at the tariff war now, some sort of American claim on global wealth, that has to find a new balance. And I think that's where I was entitled.
Shall I say something really scary, Marijn? Maybe that is the new world order. Maybe that is what's coming after the new world order that FDR started.
It could be the ultimate consequence. I sincerely hope not, because I think in terms of the perspective, looking over the last 80 years of freedom, I think actually, as Professor Kennedy has very clearly explained, we've come closer to the ideal of the maximum benefit for all. The Pareto efficiency, yeah. some advance, but no one will get worse off.
And the devil is in the details, huh? The for all.
Absolutely,
not
yeah.
just
but
me,
I think that's realization that Roosevelt had. It's not just the Americans. So it's not America first. America is part of a world order. And if the Americans want to benefit, ultimately, the whole thing has to fit.
Yeah. Seems like
I've not been short.
Seems like a almost charmingly old-fashioned idea now, huh? Now that we've seen how quickly things have changed. Pardon me? Okay. Please stand up. Tell us your name.
Yeah. My name is Gaia Son. It's almost, it sounds to me a little bit contradictory almost when you say that there was this idea of unlimited possibility for wealth and freedom of want. To me, it seems like there is this insight that if everybody has that right to strive for it, there ultimately, and I think it has been proven over the years, there is more of freedom of want in total. It's just if you allow individuals to strive endlessly at the cost of others' rights to freedom of, that's when you look at it as if it's a limited amount, because then it's just a matter of how do we divide what is there. And I think there is, from a lot of different disciplines, there's proof that if you have the audacity to think in terms of if I am entitled, others are entitled as well, and what I would want for myself doesn't need to be taken from others, that there is in total more of it. Okay, that's...
Eloquently said. Thank you so much. I couldn't agree with you more, although I don't think it's the reigning ideology in the United States at the moment.
No, but it's
maybe that's the problem.
If I might, just thinking about the difference between the 1940s, you know what the highest tax rate in the United States was in the 1940s on, I think, income from $1 million or more, something like that, I think was 94%.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, it was really, within a couple of percentage points, but it was really a very, very high number, right? So we've talked about income tax rates, especially for the wealthy, going down substantially in the last number of years. So so I guess I'm also trying to think about that you are talking about, and that's the thing I'm really sort of trying to capture in the 1940s, that there is this idea that these four freedoms can only be attained in the context of mutuality and in community. Right? So that's a kind of a sense that you get there. With all the limitations of that, I mean, as again, Bulasan's life points out, it's not as if, you know, the Filipinos in the United States had a full share at the table. I mean, you know, ghastly discrimination taking place against them. But it is, you can sort of say that there are these kinds of communitarian limitations that you have on how far freedoms of others can go. And I think that has been loosened over time, and that's why we are
indeed,
where we are. So,
indeed.
Yes.
Unhinged, I would even say.
Yeah.
I have one last question for you, because we just have literally 2 minutes left. Listening to you, James, talk about that table with the unbelievable turkey. I just can't get over the turkey. That the table was the table, yes, but it was community. It was a happy place. It was togetherness. It seems that the discussion now is moving from the freedom from want. It's moving from a seat at the table. That's just as important now as what's on the table. Has that been a change in social priorities?
I mean, this is really one of the, I think as we all know, one of the central problems of the moment, which is particularly acute in the United States, which is the epidemic of loneliness and the problem of social isolation. I think this is one reason I think that picture that James picked out was really so apt, because it, if you give it a closer look, it makes so clear that there's more to freedom from want than the satisfaction of appetites. What really makes that picture, you know, is the people gathered around the table, the looks of delight in their eyes as they engage with one another, the kind of joyousness of the occasion.
It struck me, Phil, that actually in that picture, nobody was really looking at the turkey.
Nobody. They're looking at each other.
Yeah, yeah.
No. That's right. I mean, they weren't in the room when they were painted, but yeah, I mean, but Rockwell chose.
That's a statement
yeah, that's
by
right. But
Rockwell.
Rockwell chose not to have them look at the turkey. So no, it's about being with each other and about the delight of being at the table with each other. So it's and this question of this social isolation and what sense. By the way, there's statistically, it's not clear that Americans are eating less around the family table than they were 40 years ago.
I thought we all grazed.
But we all grazed. But you know, because I would have thought so too. But there is no conclusive evidence that's the case. But certainly much less than the 1940s. So in that sense, there's been a kind of declension. One last thing I can say is about that. Rockwell's painting was not popular in Europe because of the turkey was too large. So in war-torn Europe, having a turkey of that size seemed almost obscene at a table like that. But
because the paintings were from just after the war?
1943.
43, during the war.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, yeah. We didn't have, nobody was eating turkey here then.
Nobody was eating turkey here, and so it was it's certainly not of that size.
What a wonderful detail. Thank you so much. Thank you both.
One last thing, which is that, you know, in a sense, the original American dream, as the Puritans themselves understood it, was clearly articulated by the future governor of Massachusetts, John Winthrop, in a speech that he gave on board the Arbella shortly before he and a group of other Puritans departed for the New World, where he was absolutely clear that they might have to abridge their wants and desires, but that they should delight in one another.
Ah, great. We can learn something from that.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you both. See you back in a few minutes. May I give the floor to Kim Whaley.
Thank you, Tracy.
To discuss freedom of speech.
Yeah, I appreciate that we ended that last segment on such a high note around unity. I'm going to focus my comments on the United States and the freedom of speech under the First Amendment. Civil rights leader Frederick Douglass said, quote, "No right was deemed by the fathers of the government more sacred than the right of speech." Excuse me, I need this.
I'm sorry.
"More sacred than the right of speech, that of all rights," he said, "is the dread of tyrants. It is the right which they first of all strike down. They know its power. And I would suggest that the reason it's powerful is that the freedom to speak means the freedom to think. And there's something about the freedom to think that ties to our humanity, our individuality. So I want to talk about three things. One is, what does the First Amendment say on this? And Phil mentioned that to some degree. Second, where are we in the United States when it comes to freedom of speech? And this is where things get, unfortunately, a bit dark again in the room. And then I want to close on that idea of why should we care? Because in speaking to people in the United States, I've been here since February, there seems to be this idea that if it doesn't affect me, if I stay out of the line of fire, then I don't have to worry about it. I can almost dissociate myself from these broader collective liberties that are at risk in the moment because they don't affect me personally. So the First Amendment to the Constitution was ratified in 1791, a few years after ratification of the original Constitution, and it has something relating to speech in 4 places. Of course, there's freedom of speech, there's freedom of the press, there's freedom to assemble, and there's freedom to petition the government for grievances. And when I started about 10 years ago doing public-facing civic education, only a third of the American public, according to a survey out of the University of Pennsylvania, could name the 3 branches of government. Now it's 2/3, so that's good news, frankly. And now more than 50% can name freedom of speech. That's the only right guaranteed under the Constitution that a majority of Americans could even identify. So it's important. As Phil indicated, there's been some back and forth on the freedom of speech as well. Just a few years after the ratification of the First Amendment, the Federalist Congress passed the Sedition Act, which actually made it a crime to make false, scandalous, or malicious writings against the government. That was under John Adams. And the belief was that unless the government actually tries to stop speech in advance, that the First Amendment is not infringed on if speech is retaliated against. Those acts were either lapsed or repealed when Jefferson took office in 1800. And since then, since I've been in this business, the Supreme Court has been very vigorous and rigorous in its expansive interpretation of freedom of speech. In particular, when it comes to content. What you're saying, even if it's unpopular or offensive, with certain exceptions, is very, very strongly protected under Supreme Court precedent. The court has said, quote, all persons under the First Amendment are enabled to think and speak as they wish, not as the government demands. And they've identified problems with government efforts to, quote, punish or suppress disfavored expression. Disfavored expression. Hold on to that concept for a minute. I want to first talk, though, about a case from a couple years ago that I think exemplifies how broadly the Supreme Court has interpreted this idea of freedom of speech or freedom of expression. There was a website designer in Colorado who had never made a website for engaged couples who were to be married. She wanted to get in the business of doing that, but she had religious objections, or has religious objections, to gay and lesbian couples getting married. At the time, Colorado had a broad anti-discrimination law that said if you are a business of public accommodation, you serve the public, you can't discriminate on the basis of LGBTQ status, you can't discriminate on the basis of race, on the basis of disability, all kinds of things. And she sued, challenging that statute as unconstitutional under the First Amendment. And she reasoned this way. She said, listen, I've never made a wedding website for anybody, but one day I might want to do that. And that's my creative expression. And one day, if I make a wedding website for a heterosexual couple, a gay couple could come in the door and say, we want one too. And I will say no to that because of my religious beliefs. And if I say no, maybe Colorado will get wind of it, and Colorado will come and enforce its anti-discrimination law against me, which would impose some kind of financial penalty. So my speech is chilled because of that law floating around. And the Supreme Court sided with her and effectively dismantled the anti-discrimination protections under the state law in the name of freedom of speech. So point 2, where are we now? Remember, I talked about the idea of disfavored expression. Freedom of speech has been under frontal attack since January 20th of this year. And there's been a number of direct actions around specific disfavored expression contained in executive orders. This is in writing. They include the following content. Remember, content is highly, highly protected. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Content relating to race. Content relating to climate. Content relating to what the administration has identified, and I'm quoting out of executive orders, as, quote, ideologues who deny the biological reality of sex. Content relating to, and again I'm quoting, anti-Jewish racism in leftist anti-American colleges and universities. Content involving, quote, the weaponization of government, or, quote, political opponents in the 2016 and 2020 elections. So far, actions taken in connection with this disfavored expression have included student arrests, detentions, withholding of federal funding for universities, withdrawal of security clearances for law firms and lawyers, canceling federal contracts for law firms and for their clients, which according to these law firms could destroy their businesses. Some have agreed to comply with this kind of intimidation. And the president's reasons for taking these steps, again, direct from an executive order, is to, quote, ensure alignment with the interests of the American people. Ensure alignment with a certain version of speech and ideology. He's gone so far as to single out people by name. Chris Krebs, his head of cybersecurity and infrastructure security under the first administration, who declared the 2020 election that gave Joe Biden the presidency safe and secure. In one of these orders, Krebs is alleged to have, quote, falsely and baselessly denied that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen, and it specifically directs the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security to, quote, take all appropriate action to review Krebs' activities as a governmental employee. Then there's the intimidation of the media. Just last week, CBS News pledged to pay the president $15 million to settle a $20 billion defamation lawsuit relating to 60 Minutes interview of his rival for the presidency, Kamala Harris. Most lawyers believe that was a frivolous lawsuit, and the CEO of CBS, Wendy McMahon, quit in apparent protest. And then, of course, there's the icon of Americanism, Bruce Springsteen. He has spoken out against the current administration in a few of his recent concerts. The president has called for, quote, major investigations into him and other artists who supported Kamala Harris in the last election. So not only are these actions chilling, but they have a chilling effect. That's at least the expectation, that they will make other people give pause before they exercise their First Amendment right to free speech. So this gets to my point number 3, this idea that freedom to speak means freedom to think. Nothing in the Constitution about freedom of to think. There's lots of stuff the Supreme Court reads into the Constitution, including in 1937, it wrote in a case called Palco versus Connecticut that, quote, freedom of thought is the matrix, the indispensable condition of nearly every other form of freedom. in a case called Ashcroft versus Free Speech Coalition, which struck down parts of the Child Pornography Prevention Act of 1996 on free speech grounds. It wrote, First Amendment freedoms are most in danger when the government seeks to control thought or to justify its laws for that impermissible end. The right to think is the beginning of freedom, and speech must be protected from the government because speech is the beginning of thought. So when I speak to audiences and non-lawyers, non-law students in the United States, I do it a fair amount. I try to give common sense examples that relate potentially to people's personal lives to capture the meaning or the rationale behind laws. There's always a reason for a law. And for this one, I talk about philosophers Jeremy Bentham and Michael Foucault's conception of the panopticon, which I have an image up here. And the idea that Bentham in the 18th century hypothesized was, if you create a prison with a central watchtower that allows the guards to see the inmates that are all in a circular pattern facing inward, the inmates can't see into the tower. So they never know when they're being surveilled. And he hypothesized this was a perfect prison because they always would believe they were being surveilled because they couldn't see the prison guards. And therefore, they would conform their behavior to what the government wanted by virtue of the fear of retaliation and being under surveillance. In the 1970s, Foucault expanded that idea to government in general and society in general, and argued it wasn't such a great thing, that modern power structures can operate as systems of social control. That if we believe we can be surveilled at any time, we will begin to monitor or censor ourselves. So the panopticon is a metaphor that's often raised in connection with digital surveillance. But I would suggest it's also a helpful tool for people to grasp the gravity of why if Chris Krebs or Bruce Springsteen or Oprah Winfrey was even, I think, identified as one of these pro-Kamala Harris folks, if these people or people in the media like myself get targeted, but I just stay out, and I know people in the United States who are moved out of their media careers or journalistic careers, or aren't even signing emails to students supporting the rule of law for fear that it'll somehow come back to haunt them. That separation is a myth, and it's a dangerous one. Because this attack on freedom of speech, direct attack, strikes at the heart of this idea of the freedom to speak in a way that the government dislikes. If we censor ourselves, we're losing something so deep about what makes us human. And I would suggest that if this trajectory continues unabated, there are all kinds of lawsuits, but it's continuing. The lawsuits are not chilling the administration from undertaking these actions, that it's not just the rule of law we lose, it's something about freedom itself. And I'll wind up with a quote from Benjamin Franklin in 1722. Americans love quoting the founding fathers. Their mothers were there somewhere, we just don't know about them. And he said, quote, "Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech." Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Clarice, may I turn the floor over to you?
Thank you. Goedenavond, iedereen. Good evening, everybody. I'm not a scholar. You'll soon find out why this disclaimer. Freedom from fear. When I was 2 years old, the war approached on thunderclouds in my country of origin, Liberia. My mother was presented with the option to evacuate with me to my country of birth, the United States, or to stay behind with the rest of her children. She chose to travel with me, as I was the youngest of the bunch. Back in the States, she sat glued to a transistor radio, praying the waves carried some hope for her loved ones. What does freedom from fear mean when you were born in unsafety? When we thought the war had ended, it turned out we were only flung in its treacherous eye. We had to flee from the second part of the war to the Netherlands when I was 4 years old. And although I was physically safe, I did not feel safe mentally or emotionally, because I had landed in a society that made it crystal clear I would have to fight my way in because of the color of my skin, which I was not aware of meant anything other than an arbitrary connection to my kin. But even though they said I had to fight my way in, I could never fight my way into acceptance, rendering the fighting a futile exercise, like wrestling one's shadow and expecting to win. What does freedom from fear mean when you have to grow up in adversity? As a youngster, I traveled between the Netherlands and the US to visit family and experienced and saw, next to the most influential culture and counterculture in the world, an obscene amount of poverty, segregation, and governmental neglect. What does freedom from fear mean when there is injustice all around you? Roosevelt described the fourth freedom from fear as follows. It means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world. End of quote. His visionary leadership, prioritizing human rights, economic security, and affordable health care brought forth an era of prosperity in the United States and had a positive impact on other, mostly Western countries. Yet, he also kidnapped Japanese Americans from their homes and imprisoned them in concentration camps after the devastating bombing of Pearl Harbor, showcasing once again that no human, visionary or villain, is immune to fear and the subjugation of others when they believe their safety and what they perceive to be theirs is threatened. We saw it in extreme fashion with the Nazis and their ideology Roosevelt and the Allied forces combated. We see it now. The world is on fire, and we seem powerless to do anything about it. Every day there seems to be some new terrible event to witness. The beheading of children, the triumph of a right-wing radical party, the destruction of an entire village by a natural disaster, the revival of a Nazi group. It turns out, the problems of society we thought had been eradicated were just lying dormant until the time came for them to rear their ugly head again. We fear scarcity, so we overconsume, over-asking and exploiting mine workers, many of them children in countries like Congo who provide us with cobalt for our laptops and phones. Nations fear not being the strongest or wealthiest, so they interfere in ethnic conflicts like in Sudan and influence foreign politics so national companies can make record profits. As victims, we fear becoming victimized again, so we utilize our victimhood as justification to victimize others. We are witnessing Israel doing exactly that in Palestine, backed by Western states. But this is not a unicum. In my country of origin, Liberia, the oldest republic in Africa, where Mami Wata and the rainforest meet is also the place where free enslaved Americans ruled over the natives with an iron fist. which led to a decades-long war. The reason I had to flee. How do we get to a better place when we veered so far from it? When Trump got reelected, many felt and feel defeated, depleted, and demoralized by the undermining of judicial institutes, be it the Supreme Court or the International Court of Justice here in Den Haag, being prohibited to investigate genocide in Palestine, the prioritization of billionaires by tax cuts and benefits, and influence in national and international democracies, the normalization of white supremacy, deporting immigrant residents, sometimes even citizens, whilst inviting in white Afrikaners, stifling dissidents, vilifying knowledge and scientists, dismantling press freedom, lies and falsification, the demonization of marginalized groups, focusing on the wrong 1%, the drilling into our earth, slashing the very veins that sustain us, the policing of the wombs, and with that trying to control life and creation, the fear-mongering, the fear-mongering. It happens not only in the US, but is also sneaking into the Netherlands when Wilders repeats and repackages what Trump says, anti-immigration, Islamophobia, when our Prime Minister Schoof acts as a hand puppet, too weak to condemn the killing of children, when a majority of the population demands that changes and the minority with power to do so chooses not to listen. That tells me our democracy has weakened, or maybe never truly existed. Cracking down on protesters, proposing to surveil immigrant citizens when the government has become the one we should be watching. The fear-mongering, the fear-mongering. To me, this extremism is a reaction to the fact that we're becoming more critical, more aware, and more free. It is an attempt to keep life itself into a chokehold. We can't breathe. History always shows a backlash when the people move forward, demanding more justice and equity. We saw that in the civil rights era, in socialist movements in Europe led by Jewish workers. We see it now. You can only attempt to squash a butterfly once the caterpillar has turned into one. But I see us as time travelers of sorts, because we have been here before and we overcame, so we can overcome again. As a journalist, artist, and organizer who is an observer of history, of the ways humans move, resist, and change, every time a big bad is defeated is when we come together and tap into our individual and collective power, if we can get over ourselves and the fear that's instilled. The rise in hatred we see towards what's considered foreign or other is also fear of ourselves. We fear that the world might be much more complex, difficult, and inexplicable than we know, than some of us may be able to hold and comprehend. That we might be much more complex, difficult, and inexplicable to hold and comprehend. We fear trans people, well, not me, but some of us, because they show us a different way of living that is a threat to the status quo, to our idea of safety. The algorithm fed by our new tech overlords strikes fear in our minds, bending, manipulating, distorting, until we do not only fear our neighbor, but truth herself. Fear. That churning feeling in the pit of your stomach that devours like a black hole, strips you of your courage, contorts your values, stretches you inside out until you come out unrecognizable as day-old chewed gum. Who can say what is on the other side of a black hole? I'm not trying to incite more fear. I'm saying fear has never left the building. It morphed, metastasized, and returned as a seemingly undefeatable beast. As humans, we are afraid of uncertainty, of unknowing, of what we might become when we do face our fears, embrace them, pass through them as seasoned ghosts. Perhaps what awaits us on the other side of the dark hole is only the beauty of ourselves, unraveled and unfiltered, naked in all its truth and imperfection, endless in its possibility. Perhaps that is what we fear the most. True freedom exposes the good, the bad, the extraordinary, the mundane, the in-between, true freedom is uncontainable and cannot be governed by any force but our own. So, we avoid that responsibility and cage another, hoard the wealth, spread the division. We build systems around it, inside and outside ourselves. The chains we use to shackle others' ankles are wrapped around our own wrists to also keep ourselves in place. I believe that until we break those chains that keep us not only divided from another, but divided from ourselves, we will never be free. I believe that fear is not the place where courage ends, but where it truly begins. And I believe that we must not be afraid to look into the mirror and see that thing we fear most is ourselves. We're so busy running away from that truth, we would rather run into hell than to face our demons on earth, to face the way we treat others, the way we have been treated, or the way we treat ourselves, to face the way the system lives within us. Do we secretly feel inferior, and that's the reason we have to subjugate others? Do we secretly want to be something other than we are and resent those that dare to? Are we embarrassed by how we would want to dress, speak, walk, and talk? How and whom we would want to love? Are we ashamed to remove our costumes and uniforms that keep us obediently working the machines, prompting us to uphold the status quo? Do not divest. Do not diverge. Do not change course. It shall destroy you, the system warns. But what is truly destroying us, killing humanity, is the refusal to face our own humanness, in all our magnificence, in all our flaws. I've been forced to face my fears many times when tragedy struck, as typically is the case. The fear of instability, which led to control, the fear of persecution, which led to self-censorship, the fear of rejection, which led to isolation, the fear of not being enough, because that is what we're told. Most of us are invited to confront ourselves in some way or another in the course of our lives. The bravery with which some of us meet such challenges is the same bravery we need to inject into our society. So, when they ask me what freedom of fear looks like to me, on a good day, I might answer, freedom from enslavement or imprisonment, freedom of living, freedom of movement, freedom of community, freedom of belief, freedom of speech, freedom of mind, freedom from trauma, freedom of expression, freedom of loving, freedom of spirit, freedom of being. What does it then feel like, that feeling of no fear? Nina Simone once said, freedom means no fear. How do you tell somebody how it feels to be in love? How are you going to tell anybody who has not been in love how it feels to be in love? You cannot do it to save your life. You can describe things, but you can't tell them, but you know it when it happens. That's what I mean by free. I'll tell you what freedom is to me: no fear. Lots of children have no fear. That's the only way I can describe it. That's not all of it, but it is something to really, really feel, like a new way of seeing, like a new way of seeing something. End of quote. I think to be free is to feel the warmth of the sun on your skin, to savor a lover's chuckle, to hold your child in the palm of your hand, to taste a pawpaw fruit ripened in your own backyard with no fear. It brings me back to my days in Liberia as a little girl before the war, bushy-browed and afro-clouded hair, tongue as sharp as a razor's blade, the rhythm of my ancestors in my tread, an Ankara-printed lapa tied around my waist, and I wonder if it was the only time I truly felt free. That brings me to the images behind me. The first one is a painting by Norman Rockwell, who imagined what freedom from fear looked like, inspired by Roosevelt's speech. White middle-class parents tucking their children into bed, far away from the impending doom. The image after it, or before it in this case, was taken by me. I took it during the hands-off protests in New York. They were the first nationwide protests against the Trump administration and Elon Musk. There were 1,200 of them around the country. The little girl's sign and presence felt like a reminder of that little girl inside myself, not powerless and tucked in, but powered up and ready to speak for what is right, because she has not been taught to fear herself or her own power yet. Throughout all of this, we must show up knowing what our power is, because we've dared to face our fears, the ones living inside and outside of us, so that even when they whisper words of fearfulness about the other in our ear, words of fearfulness about ourselves, they will not take hold, because we have already mastered our fear and made it our friend. I cannot precisely say, and I think it changes day by day, but right now, in this moment, I feel that freedom from fear is a choice, and it's choosing to continue to grow, even as, or especially when, we're still residing in the dark. That is when it matters most. Thank you.
Aren't we blessed with such eloquent speakers? Kim, I'm curious to hear your reaction to what Clarice said at the end. Freedom from fear is a choice, because freedom of speech, or the lack of freedom of speech, inspires fear, inspires self-censorship. Can freedom from fear be a choice, or is that only for very courageous people?
Well, I just want to say it's so nice to have poetry and art in this conversation. And it was a very moving presentation, and it speaks to something intangible, I think, that is a possibility of a collective response to what's happening, at least in the United States. And it's come up throughout the evening's discussions, which is this community, the idea of connecting with others, and that's where our power comes from. And so I do think there's a choice here. And people ask me all the time, what can I do? And a lot of people are just checked out because it's too scary to even think about it, so they'll sort of dissociate and go on with their lives and not even read the news. And I'll say, talk about it. There's a fear even to raise it over coffee or at work or with family or with friends, for fear of triggering some kind of response that is uncomfortable or shifting the mode of the room into politics. But this is so much more than politics. It's about, like we've been saying, it's about not just freedom for ourselves, but for our children, for the next generation, for the earth. So if anything matters now, it is to overcome this fear, and it doesn't have to be doing things like some of us do and publicly speaking in ways that could end up on someone's X feed when they're sitting at breakfast. But in the smaller moments, in community life, in your family, to have the courage to face this, to read about it, to see what's going on, and to board the article and actually talk about it. I think that's potentially a germination for something that could respond to this in kind, ultimately.
But Clarice, you say fear has never left the building.
I fear not.
I fear.
Yeah.
I fear you might be right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I really wondered when I was listening to your talk. We'll never know, but it's hypothetical. What would FDR have thought about how we think about fear and losing our freedom from fear, which is something he so earnestly desired?
Yeah, I think not. I mean, we can't say how, but I think just sort of like referring to what we do know about him, I think he would respond similarly to how he has responded in the past, which is with courage and with
But
inspiration.
I think your talk would also have made him sad.
So, yeah, why do you say that?
Oh, have we come to this?
Yeah, unfortunately. And I think, but you know, as someone who sort of like is very interested in these cycles of change throughout history, this is a pattern that we're in. It always happens, right? So when there's a uprising, when marginalized people or people that are fighting for equal rights or for democracy sort of speak out and become more mainstream, there's always a backlash. And you know, professors, people that study sort of protest movements, I was talking to, you might know her, Jacqueline Stekelenburg, they call her the protest professor. And they've also analyzed it and said that is, you know, you have the peak and you have then sort of the clash. And I feel like right now, sort of like, or the decline, right now we're in the decline. And what I think is once you are able to observe and acknowledge and register those patterns, you can influence them. So I feel like, you know, what you said before and what everyone has been saying is like we're in this, we feel like we have no agency, no autonomy, no sort of like real means to affect change, but actually it is the opposite. Because we have so much means to affect change, people are being stifled and suppressed, right? And once you stop playing into that, what, you know, that's this propaganda that we're being fed, you can actually sort of create change or
well, let me play the advocate of the devil here, because we heard Phil talk about the great reversal.
Right. That
for so many people who have felt disenfranchised, not listened to, that in the flyover countries, that the coasts had taken over power and that nobody was listening to them, nobody cared about their plight. And they now feel empowered. They now feel enfranchised.
Yeah.
So it's the other side of the same balance. Now the other side says, this is our time.
Yeah, you mean what we were saying about the white Christian nationalists?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think that's because they also are feeding into this idea of separation and this idea of hierarchy. You know, American writer Octavia Butler, she was a science fiction writer, and she often wrote about sort of like our the illusion of hierarchy that we've kind of made our religion. That I can only have something if someone else does not have it.
Yeah.
And the opposite is true, right? Like Chaya said, I thought that was really apt. You know, the opposite is true because another has something, it sort of like, it increases. There is more abundance. So I think it's a mindset, and it's a mindset that has sort of like influenced the norms we have created in this society and the systems that we have created in this society and the institutions, but norms can be changed. You know, another sci-fi writer, Ursula K. Le Guin, said, you know, there was a time that the power of kings was like endless. Exorbitant. Yeah. You know, you could not, and it was unimaginable that we wouldn't have kings, but look at where we are now. So
we have a king.
I mean, but what is his power though? Let's be honest.
He's not a king we're scared of.
He's a symbolical figurehead, you know. Yeah. No offense, Willem. Maar so, you know, if that can change, everything else can. My earrings. You told me not to wear these earrings. My ring is getting stuck in my earring. Okay, I'm good. So if that can be changed, any sort of power in human history can be changed by the will of the people.
Yeah. And there are millions of Americans now who finally feel that they're being listened to, that they're in power.
Well, can I say something about a king? Which is, we don't have kings, at least we didn't before January 20th. And there's a benefit of a king, which is the king can come in and issue edicts that look a little bit like executive orders these days, and, you know, break all the windows in the room and change the furniture around and do it swiftly and not have to deal with, you know, compromise and bureaucracy and elections. And I think, on one hand, there is this idea of rights for me, but not for thee, absolutely. But on the other hand, I think there is definitely a desperation among many Americans. I mean, the statistic of 59% being reportedly one paycheck away from homelessness, I hadn't heard that, but it didn't really surprise me. Mm-hmm. And so there is, I think, a failure of government, maybe since the 80s, where the American dream of owning a house, of having a pension, of having your basic needs met, taking care of your children and the next generation is slipping through folks' fingers and getting harder and harder and harder. It's only going to get harder under this president. So the promise of an answer, it's like Barack Obama. I mean, he was 8 years in office on the promise of hope. And then you have a strongman that comes in and says, listen, I'll fix it. Give me the power and I'll fix it. And I won't have a platform that's concrete. You can project whatever you want on it. But for sure, we'll blame these people. We've seen this before, or that generation prior in Europe. It's these people that I will take care of. They'll get them out of the way. And then, your basic needs will be met, and you won't be living in fight or flight, your limbic system at all times in this constant state of anxiety and stress, which has only gotten worse in the last few months.
But don't you think it's also because this is like the regular playbook, right, of these sort of like dictators, demagogues, and don't you think there should also be some sort of alternative? Because that's what I'm really missing, that instead of only thinking about or investing energy in combating that sort of sentiment, there's a lot of energy that could also go through sort of like the visualization of an alternative, right? And I feel like that's kind of missing, which makes it more easier for people to choose the one strong leader because he makes these promises. Even though he can't keep them, at least he's offering something.
Well, 2 points. I mean, I think the Democratic, we only have 2 parties, which, John Adams, our friend John Adams wrote to Abigail that would end, America would end in self-suicide because there's only 2 parties. And the Democrats haven't fulfilled any of their promises, and the last 2 presidential candidates, both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, were sort of given, anointed. People didn't really get to choose, and I think there's some frustration. And the other thing we haven't had time to really talk about, I think maybe someone mentioned it, is misinformation and disinformation. That there's this constant stream of biased algorithmic content that feeds into these grievances. And I'm just even finding with my students, law students and others who are very well educated and also know how to use social media, they can't get the information. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think until that gets penetrated in a way, it's garbage in, garbage out.
Mm-hmm. A personal question for you, Kim. Speaking about freedom of speech, you speak fearlessly, but I can imagine that you do also feel fear, given the way Trump and the current government have approached the media. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I appreciate your comments about facing the fear and that. It's that line between courage. It's the courage and facing the fear that is what's going to push us through something else. But of course, I worry about it. He's removed citizens, retaliated against all kinds of speech, and said, homegrowns are next. I don't think I'm on the top of the list, but I do know people that are on the enemies list that the FBI director drafted prior and published prior to being in that position in government. And the theory, and actually it's correct, of this administration is if you remove someone from the jurisdiction of the United States, you're physically outside the United States, then your constitutional rights are suspended. So it's that stealth, sort of scurrying somebody out in the middle of the night or on an airplane before a judge can actually rule, or a judge rules and you do it anyway. That is kind of the checkmate. But I think for now we have a bit of time before we cross that Rubicon. But something has to happen. Yeah. There has to be some collective resistance in a serious way. I think scholars say 3.5%, right?
3.5% rule.
That need, that women got the right to vote with 3%. Yeah. It's not a lot, but right now people are kind of thinking, well, I've been picking on George Clooney lately, the actor, because he did an interview saying, oh, well, the midterms. It'll just self-correct.
If we have midterms.
Right, well, even if we did, Americans will say, okay, good, I'm out. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna surf puppy videos until the midterms and somebody else will fix it. And then it'll be over and the nightmare's over. I don't need, as we were saying earlier, to engage in Republican form of government. I don't need to put my voice out there to spend 1 minute on it or even increase my stress level because it'll just self-correct. Right, this American exceptionalism. One of Phil's colleagues at Yale said, who's leaving for Toronto, it's like the Titanic. We don't need it. We don't need lifeboats because it can never sink. Right, that's American democracy.
Yeah. One of those three
people don't understand that.
Timothy Snyder, who spoke at the John Adams just a couple months ago. He and 2 colleagues are now leaving Yale, of all places, to move to Canada, where it's safer. Yeah.
And can I say something also about the Democratic Party? Because maybe it would also be time to look at different ways of political campaigning. Because I remember, during COVID, and when Bernie Sanders was sort of garnering this mass movement of people, right, with his policies, his ideology, and then he sort of got, how do you say that, teruggefloten, like he sort of got admonished by the Democratic Party, by the elite, saying, hey, this is not how we do things. So I think that is also prohibiting us, or in the United States, from moving forward and forming this mass movement of people that want progress and that want economic security for everybody and human rights for everybody. I think it's possible, but I think those who are in power, whether they are left-wing or right-wing, are sort of more focused on maintaining the status quo than on serving their citizens.
Well, and now I'm going to pick on not just George Clooney, but the United States Supreme Court, which, in a decision, a critical decision in 2010, declared corporations, which are legal fictions, the equivalent of living in human, breathing people that have First Amendment rights. So if you're a billionaire or you're a corporation, you can spend unlimited amount of money on campaigns, flood the airwaves, flood the internet. So long as you technically don't coordinate with the candidate, then it's completely legal. Whereas, regular citizens don't have, they can't take out a Super Bowl ad. So, and that applies to both Republicans and Democrats, that they're beholden to money in order to maintain power. Yeah. And so the speed dial is not, it's not the mom who needs some kind of public housing assistance, or it's not the migrant who's been, brutalized by the police. It's someone in Silicon Valley who has, has the ability to really change somebody's political future with the click of a mouse.
I'd like to go to our first proposition, but before I do that, I want to give you a little gift. We saw Phil's banner at the January 6th attack. Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president. But on social media, I don't remember where, I also saw something which really heartened me. Trump may be president, but Springsteen is the boss.
He is the boss. It's like the audacity of crossing Bruce Springsteen.
How dare
People love that. That's Democrats, Republicans, that's MAGA, that's everybody.
Please, you can read them all there. That's easier. Yeah. Okay. Freedom of speech real when it's on paper, or is it only real when it says it's safe to speak when you feel safe to speak? How would you react to this proposition? I thought I knew what you'd say, but I guess
did you think?
I was sure that you would say it's only real when you feel safe to speak, because otherwise you censor yourselves, as Kim said so eloquently.
I think it's that, but I think it's both, because that has to be anchored in something. Feeling safe to speak is, I think, the most important thing. So that is maybe, that's the most important thing. But then it has to be anchored in some sort of law, some sort of, or like policy.
Have faith that it will be honored.
Backed up, that it will be honored, and then you can sort of, make an appeal when it's not honored.
Mm-hmm.
So both.
Kim, I can imagine for you this is a difficult choice.
That is not hard for me at all, even though I'm the lawyer, law professor in the room. It's not the speed limit that slows us down. It's the ticket for speeding that slows us down. So the fact that there's a right on a piece of paper, if it's not enforceable or there's no consequences, then it's meaningless. And the question, when people question, are we in a constitutional crisis in the United States? Is this really the potential end of liberal democracy? The question is, what are the tickets for speeding in the White House through the Constitution and the rule of law? I don't know what they are. And so it's human nature, you know, as James Madison said, if men were angels, we would not need the government. It's human nature to blow through tickets for to speed limits, and certainly the current administration's nature. And some would argue, as I said earlier, this idea, well, let's have a monarch, maybe my life will get better. He was elected in part on his willingness to blow through speed limits. So I would for sure. I'm on camp too, but I'm curious what people in the audience think.
Any thoughts, people? How can we best come to you? Can you tell us your name?
Yes, I'm Mieke Dame, and I think it's clear to me that it's only when it's safe to speak. Because I think the whole fact that at the moment people are getting so scared to talk and to speak, and I think much more in the States than here, but I think even in Holland, the polarization is just, making us deaf and blind. And with many of us having family in America, where you see whole families not getting together for the turkey on the table anymore because there's a political divide within the family. I have a 95-year-old aunt who has now put a paper on the front door. We do not speak politics here because the kids can't get along anymore. So I think the whole polarization and the fact that people feel unsafe to speak up, that you can't have a normal conversation on politics anymore, I think that's the biggest threat we have.
Yes, the lady over here.
Hi, my name's Ellie Van de Velde. I just want to say we have a guarantee of freedom of speech in the United States in writing, and look where we are.
Clear. And the lady next to you?
Yes.
Could you stand up, please?
Yes, my name is Jeanette. I was born and raised here in the Netherlands, but I am a U.S. citizen. And Kim, when you were talking about talking to people and having a conversation and really not live in oblivion and trying to pretend nothing is going on and not reading and not listening to the news, how do you talk to people? My own son is on the other side, which breaks my heart. And there is absolutely no conversation possible. We cannot sit at the table and talk about the left and the right and what's wrong. And so I just ignore it. I don't have that conversation because it's my only family I have. And so I'd rather just pretend there is nothing going on because we don't have a family. We don't have a life then. So I'd be very curious, how do we reach those people? They watch Fox News, we read, I read everything. I'd love to have those conversations, but it's absolutely not possible. So curious how you would suggest.
First, let me say I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. You're not alone. And there's certainly been a radicalization in particular of young men in the United States. And I have 4 daughters, so I've seen it firsthand with some of their friends. I must say I have a book on this. It's called How to Think Like a Lawyer. How to Think Like a Lawyer and Why. It's kind of probably mistitled because it's really more about engaging in problem solving that deals with thorny issues. I mean, lawyers have to understand their opponent's best argument in court. So, you know, trying to have a sense of where people are coming from. But I'll say I have a couple anecdotes. We don't have a lot of time, but I gave a speech to 400 people in Florida, elderly people, and they're primarily MAGA right before I came to the Netherlands. And it went very well. We were singing the preamble to the Constitution, and they stood up and clapped. And not because of any content, but because I started talking about common values. This was also in an Uber from Disney World to the airport with 2 of my kids, where it was clear I was not, in the camp of the far right. And the guy said, "Lady, I was going to let you out of the cab, but now can you let me know you get back home safely? And if you come back, I'll take you scuba diving for free." I mean, and that's because we started talking about who's the 3 o'clock in the morning person you call. Why is it that Why do you have, what do you value in the people that are closest to you? And then once you establish those common things, you don't talk about left, right, Democrat versus Republican, but kind of go from the inside out, these human values, and then you can kind of get agreement in some of these gray areas, these soft values, and it's harder then to start screaming at each other. So it's a person by person experience. It's not something you can just create an asset and put it on Instagram. That's not going to work. And of course, it's Instagram in part, and these social media companies are getting rich on hate and division. That's the problem. So we have to start reestablishing community and learning how to do it, learning it methodically, how to do that deliberately with like a skill set.
Can I say something about that as well? I completely agree with you. I also have a book on this.
You come to the right place.
That's why we invited them.
From resistance to revolution, it's about all of these things we've been talking about. But another interesting book, I think, is Naomi Klein's book. Naomi Klein, a Canadian journalist, love her, Doppelganger, and she actually examines the process of radicalization, right? Because what is often done on the left is sort of, we're not going to talk about these people and, their lost causes. And I will say, although some people really, believe in these radical right-wing points and are this way because they are this way, but a lot of people, and she also writes about this in her book, have been radicalized because they didn't know where else to go. With COVID happening, like people went down this rabbit hole, and Democrats weren't offering anything else. So then they started following the people that did give them the attention and did give them sort of like answers to their questions. Only it was the wrong conclusions. So she analyzes this process, which I think is really great because she gives insights into what happens. And I completely agree with you when you say fostering community. Because of digitalization, because of the loss of third spaces also, work, home, and then there was this third space where people met each other wherever, from all walks of life, and that has that's disappearing more and more. So
the third space is our screen now.
Exactly, that is our third space, and then we're being completely sort of like instigated, the hatred and the division is being instigated by these tech companies, So we need to think about how do we meet each other offline again. And I understand that especially when it's your family and it's your only family, you can't do it alone. You don't want to sit there alone and be sort of like having to re-educate or whatever it is with your family member. So I would also say, try and take them with you to a third space, whether it's like a community garden where you meet different people, where you can have different conversations, or I don't know if you're religious, church, whatever, anything else. I think different experiences also really help with sort of like dismantling this radicalization. Yeah.
I've never been to a Trump rally, but I have friends in the media who have, and that feeling of belonging. The story.
Very powerful.
The power of the story, right? Yuval Noah Harari talks about it. Over 200 people, you need a story to unify. And there is one, and there really isn't one. There isn't a competing one. I think that is giving people a sense of belonging, and agency through belonging to some kind of a cause or a group. Yeah.
See the great reversal that Phil talked about. I'm going to come back to you in a moment.
Oh, sorry.
I am really sorry, but we're out of time. I have one final question for the two of you. Could you stand up? And then I'll put the same question to you. Freedom of worship and freedom from want. All essential, all important. But in your view, which one ultimately makes the other possible if you have to choose? There are no winners or losers here. We all get drinks afterwards.
Maybe I'll go with freedom from fear, actually.
1933, that's where Roosevelt started.
We have nothing to fear but fear itself.
I mean, that is, for example, in my view, true religion is not born out of fear, for example.
Yeah, and freedom of speech certainly isn't.
No.
Because then we censor ourselves.
No.
I'm drawn to the freedom from fear, but I would say that, part of the thing is you start off with this freedom of worship, as it's often been said as sort of the basis for all other rights historically developed, and Phyllis said something about that. And so that starts off then with the freedom to claim a place for your own conscience, and then to draw consequences from that. And that is also then a kind of appeal to a kind of a transcendent value that you must be in accord with. And that is, maybe you can also say, an important basis for freedom from fear. That you so in that sense,
to be who you are.
To be who you are.
Yeah.
And to
we hear that in many different contexts now.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thank you, Kim, Clarice.
Well, we're sort of musical chairs here. I'm going to say freedom from want, because if
you're hungry.
Yeah, if you're in your limbic system, your fight or flight. You can't take care of your kids. There's research on you just can't make good decisions. Literally, there are chemicals flooding through your body that it takes 30 minutes for them. If you have a big fight with your spouse, it takes 30 minutes to actually reset your body to a point where you can be thoughtful. You made this point that there are resources on the planet for everyone. And if those were satisfied, I think some of these other things, fear, the othering, the need to silence people, the need to have it my religion, not yours, that might subside if we're talking about, the causation and the chicken and egg thing. If we could satisfy Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like water, food, and then the second one, housing, safety is one of those as well. And then as you get up the pyramid, you get to meaning, which I think we all want as well, but it's hard to think about those aspirational spiritual things when your kid is sick and you can't get them help.
Clarice, what would you choose?
True. That is so true. But I would still choose freedom from fear, because I think that like I said, it's not the absence of fear, it's just having the courage to move through that fear, because we're all afraid of everything all the time. I'm afraid of speaking, but you do it because there's something more important than that fear, and then it gives you something. And I think that once we have that tackled, the courage to move through things, we will have the courage to speak up. We will have the courage to, even if we need to steal food, I'm not saying steal food, but even if we do need to, you will do that because you have to feed your children. So I think what holds us back mostly in society is because we're so afraid of everything. So once we're able to face that fear and see that it's not as big and scary as we think it is, then we can sort of move further. Yeah.
I hope it's not as big and scary as we think it is, because...
Or at least we're more powerful than the big and scary thing.
The monsters under our bed.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Clarice. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, James. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, KNAW, for making this wonderful, thought-provoking, deep evening possible. It was a joy working with you. And a huge word of thanks to all of you for joining us here this evening. And let's not be afraid together. Let's have a drink.